Let me introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Wolfgang Brandhuber is our speaker today from Agile Moves, and he'll be talking with us about the challenges of implementing Agile structures in very large-scaled environments. So let's listen now as he talks with us about the challenges and the benefits of transforming our organization to a scaled Agile framework. And Dr. Brandhuber, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, let's start. Oh, I have to. The slides here are the slides. Thank you. Um, let's start right away with the first slide. So probably you have heard of crossing the chasm. This is the usual adoption curve that Jeffrey Moore presented in his book Crossing the Chasm. That every usual introduction of new technology to the market runs through. And I've found in the years that I'm dealing with agility that this is also an adoption curve of a change within the organization. So it's not just introducing a new technology to the market, it's also introducing something new, a new behavior, a new method of working within a company. So here is a quote of Jack Welch. Back then, he was CEO of General Electric, and it's taken from the GE's annual report of 2000. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So it's simple. We as a company have to adapt faster or have to be able to adapt faster to the outside world than the outside world is able to change. So if we cannot cope with the speed of change on the outside, um, we are we will not be able to meet the challenges that we have in the future. Um, the most important thing, the goal of our changes is the responsiveness to the outside world. So we have to be able to respond to all the changes of the outside world as fast as possible. And we have two factors of responsiveness. This is speed on the one hand and predictability on the other hand. So if we don't have predictability, speed alone wouldn't do any good. So we could have a lot of really fast changes, but if we are not predictable in what we are doing, so in the quality, in the outcome, but also maybe not predictable in the speed, so that we have fast changes and slow changes, we will also not be able to respond to the outside world in a way that we need to stay competitive in the market. I'm sorry for the headline. This is still in German, so it just says predictability. I just noted that a minute before the speech started. So we have two different kinds of predictability, or two different phases of predictability. We have a different predictability in the stability phase and the disruption phase. So what I mean with that is, if you introduce change into a company, you have probably some kind of disruption, maybe a smaller disruption. For instance, if you introduce Kanban with an evolutionary change approach, the disruption is probably a little bit less than if you introduce something like Scrum with new roles, new events, new artifacts, and things like that. But either way, there will be some kind of disruption, and every disruption should be followed by some kind of stabilization phase, so that you can get comfortable with the new habits. And then there's probably a new disruption. And in our endeavor to change, we have to not only be predictable in the stabilization phase, but also in the disruption phase. So what we need, from my point of view, is we need an operating system for large organizations. So what I mean by that is we need a layer of indirection to speed up change. Um, if, for instance, you have a mobile phone and there you have maybe an Android operating system on it, you have a lot of applications that run on your mobile phone as well as maybe on a tablet or some other devices. And this level of abstraction, this layer of abstraction that the operating system provides is really important so that you that you can install this application on a lot of different. This means that this layer of indirection is something that we should also have um, with introducing changes into the company. So if you take Kanban, Lean Six Sigma, Safe, Scrum, whatever, the usual way is that we have these applications hard coded right into the company. So um, we have a hard time changing things because we are lacking this layer of indirection. So if I am coding every app into the mobile phone and hard code that into the mobile phone, I will have a hard time changing things. And so this operating system, this level of indirection for organization to change faster, because we will need the ability to change faster in the future, because it's not foreseeable that the market is changing, or the speed at which the market is changing will decrease. So this whole discussion about operating systems in large organizations is something that is just emerging. So this is just my contribution to what an operating system for large solutions could be. I personally, through my years of Agile coaching, I've identified 3 areas. So an operating system should have 3 areas, I think. So one is data-driven transformation, so that we base our transformation endeavors on hard data, and we will go into that soon. And then organizational development. We will also see what's behind that, and individual development. So that we also have to empower, educate, enable the people within the organization to be able to support the change. The first we want to look into is organizational development. What does organizational development mean for me? So organizational development is the first step of product development. This is a direct conclusion of Conway's law. So if you look up Conway's law, for instance, in Wikipedia or wherever, so Conway's law says that the structure of a complex product, like a software product, always follows the structure, the communication structure within the organization that produces this product. That means, for instance, if you have 3 Scrum teams producing one increment of a software, and you go into the code, then you will probably have 3 different parts of the code which make up this new increment. So this has been proven over and over again that Conway's law holds true for a lot of cases. And if you conclude what that means for our organization, is that organization development, as it's depicted here, is the first step of product development. So we ship our org chart actually. An inversion of Conway's law would be systems can only be as complex as the ability of the organization building the system to handle complexity. That means we have different classes of complex systems. So we have simple systems, we have more complex systems, and more complex systems building on that, and another class building on that. And so systems can be hugely complex. They can be a lot more complex than what we as an organization are able to handle. So we as an organization can only handle up to a certain class of complexity. This is true for every organization. Beyond that, we are not able to handle the system, or we are not able to build the system. So if we want to build more complex systems, we have to enable the organization to deal with this level of complexity. And another conclusion of Conway's law, if we look at what we are building worldwide, so the software solutions we are building are growing more complex every day. So maybe we start out with a fairly complex software system that we are distributing to our customers. But every day, this system that we are building becomes more and more complex. So we are adding new classes. We are adding another database table. We are adding different workflows for different kinds of usage of the software. And so we may have to conform to legal things, or to whatever the environment is that we are working in. And so this complexity, this increasing complexity usually leads to a point where we slow down with what we are doing. So maybe you had like Scrum teams, you had 10 Scrum teams in the past, and these 10 Scrum teams, they had a velocity of, let's say, in average 30 story points or something like that. And now, with the ever-growing complexity of the system that we are building, the velocity of the Scrum teams just decreases. And maybe at some point in time, you only have maybe 10 story points in average delivered by the Scrum teams of your organization. And you think about, okay, what do we do wrong? So we have the same requirements engineering, we have the same automated testing, whatsoever, but we are growing slower and slower all the time. So maybe we acquire technical debt or something like that, and then maybe you have an initiative to get rid of technical debt, and for a certain time, maybe that really does the trick, and the organization speeds up again, and maybe you are then not an average by 10 story points, but by 20 story points or 25, and then the same thing happens again. So the velocity of the whole organization decreases again. And this is just a natural thing, because the longer we work on a certain software product, the more it grows in complexity. And if we are not able to enable the organization to deal with this kind of complexity, so we will reach some kind of break-even point where the complexity of the system equals the ability to handle the complexity of the organization. And if we go beyond that point, if the complexity is much bigger, or grows much bigger than the ability of the organization to handle that, of course, we will come at a certain point in time to a stage where we can not deliver any new things at all. On the next slide, we see the most important thing to enable the organization to deal with that level of complexity is that we have a predictability in organizational development. But if we want to have a predictability in organizational development, we have to do it the same way as we do it with product development. So we have to have a backlog. We have to have like features or stories describing what exactly we want to change. And if we want to do it right, we have to have just one backlog where everything is in, where you have your product development, where you have your technical development, and where you have your organizational development all in one backlog. So one of the reasons, or the most important reason that I came across, why this is not happening, or is usually not happening, is because you have to prioritize then all the things in the backlog with a common denominator. So you have to have like latest shortest job first for product development, for technical development, for organizational development. But having a latest shortest job first prioritization of all the items in the backlog means that you have to identify the cost of delay and the lead time for all the items in the backlog. This is usually not that much of a problem if you have product development. If you have a product feature or a product story, you can think of what cost of delay does that have. So what is the cost of not having that certain feature in place? So what are we missing on revenue side, or what do we have to pay? Lead time. Lead time means when do I have that feature? So how long does it take until I have that feature? And maybe for some organizational development stories or features, maybe it's easy to get the cost of delay. For a lot, it's not that easy, but for some, maybe it's easy. But to have the lead time of your organizational development stories, this is the hard thing to do. So we have to define like acceptance criteria. We have to define a certain level of quality. So we have to get like acquainted to this kind of work and get like experience in how long does it take to deliver a certain habit within the company, because this is what it's all about. It's all about habits. So what is the lead time to form a certain habit? And this is something that is usually hard to, if you don't have any experience with that, it's usually hard to estimate. It's usually hard to get. And so if we are lacking lead time, we are also lacking latest shortest job first. And this means we don't have one prioritization for all items in the backlog. And this is the reason, or one of the main reasons that I came across, why we are not prioritizing organizational development features in the same backlog as technical or product development features. So here you see 9 areas. So you see the 3 core areas: organizational development, data-driven transformation, and individual development. And each of these 3 core areas has 3 topics to it. So organizational development, which we deal right now with, has game philosophy, organizational architecture, and training plan. What does that mean? So on the next slide, you see game philosophy. So usually, the most important thing, if you want to hire a new trainer for a professional soccer club, is that you have a look at what game philosophy this particular head coach has. So of course you want to see the merits of what has he won in the past, but also what is his philosophy of playing football. And you can have a lot of different styles of playing football, and the same is true for organizational changes. So an organizational change is not just introducing Scrum or Safe or whatever, but an organizational change is always the flavor of the head coach who is responsible for the change. So the next slide, you see the game philosophy should come out of one voice. So there should be a clear game philosophy, not a lot of people who are inclined to speak their mind on how the whole thing should run. I mean, if you had like 5 or 6 head coaches to a sports team, that won't do well. You have to have one person or one head coach and a coaching staff, and they have to have one voice, so that it's absolutely clear what philosophy we try to implement within the sports team as well within the organization. The next thing is that you have to socialize that. That means it's not enough that a head coach in a soccer team just says we have to play that way, but he has to socialize that with all the people within the team, and they have to they have to give feedback, and so they are in a constant conversation of whether this is the way that they are able to play. And the third, of course, is then continuous improvement. The next slide is organizational architecture. So organizational architecture means we have to have the same things in organizational architecture like we have in in technical architecture. So technical architecture is usually done by some technical architect who have a lot of experience. They may have studied informatics or whatever, so they have years of experience just studying that, and then they usually work as developers in teams before they themselves become architects. So that means that they may have in average like a 10 years experience before they are then architects. Okay. Okay. Now that we know that organizational architecture it has the same complexity or is the foundation of every technical architecture, we should have people in place who have the same level of knowledge dealing with complexity in organization than technical architects dealing in complexity in technical aspects. So organizational architecture is something from my point of view, that will become more important in the future. The more complex the market grows, the faster the market change, the more important is the role of the organizational architect or organizational architects. And they are like a trainer staff, a coach staff in the staff of the head coach. So you can also depict the chief organizational architect as a conductor. On the one hand, you have he has all these achievements he should have. So, like in a soccer club, that you think about what titles he got in the past years. On the other hand, you have the philosophy. So, what is the philosophy that he wants the soccer team to play? And so the chief organizational architect, if we take that from soccer, should be like a conductor or a head coach, so that you don't have like 100 voices, different, a lot of different opinions, how the organization should run. So of course, there should be a continuous improvement cycle. Everyone in the soccer team should have the ability to influence what's really played. But in the end, there should be one technical architect or a group of technical architects who are responsible for the technical complexity of a product. There should be also like a group of organizational architects who speak with one voice, who are the ones who driving this like introduction of new things. The coaching staff should run as an Agile team, and there should be a diversification within the team. So that means maybe you have a Kanban coach, maybe you have a Scrum coach, maybe you have a Safe coach, because the Agile world is growing that complex in itself that it's not possible for a single individual to just have the overview of everything. So there's like you have different kinds of coaches within a soccer team. There should also be a diversification within the coaching staff in the organizational architecture team. And there should be a joint alignment. So diversification doesn't mean that everyone is just trying to push their topic through, like I'm the Kanban coach and I want everything to be Kanban, or I'm the Safe coach, I want everything to be safe. But there has to be one voice, a joint alignment within this coaching staff. And of course, there should be education. So it's not like in the past we had people who were leading like 100 people, and now in the HR world we think about what kind of work they can do, and now they are then part of this coaching staff, because it's just they are way up in the hierarchy, and the coaching staff is way up in the hierarchy too, so we switched them to the coaching staff. But they have to have the education. So you won't just take someone in a soccer team or in the coaching staff of a soccer team just because he's good at maybe some completely different things, like he's a manager in a organization and then you just take him as a soccer team manager because he just lacks the education that is needed, and the coaching staff has to have this education. So you also have to have a training plan, and this training plan, of course, changes on a daily basis. If you work with the people on the soccer ground, you have to have a training plan every day, and you change that training plan every day. And the same should also be true for introducing changes to organization. From my point of view, there should be, with the training plan, there should be a benefit hypothesis. There should be acceptance criteria with each feature we are introducing, with each new habit we are trying to form within the organization. There should also be acceptance criteria of what exactly is the acceptance criteria when a new habit is formed. There should be a definition of done, also like variation in the selection. You should give guidance, but not restrict people to a certain thing. And of course, it should be iterative and incremental, which we are doing anyway in the Agile world. So if you, this is just um, uh, for the sake of having a clear understanding of what we are talking about. On the product development side, you have epics, you have features, you have stories, something like that. On the organizational side, you have the same structure. You have initiative, you have a change, and you have what we call a move. It's just that it's clear of what we are speaking about, but it's the same level of granularity. So story is the same as move, feature is the same as change, epic is the same as initiative. So, for instance, if you want to have a resilient company and you say, okay, this is our initiative, Resilience Now. So we want to be a resilient organization. Then a change could be building up team resilience, that we say, okay, how can we build up team resilience? And the move could be, what does team resilience mean to us per team? Or development of individual change steps with acceptance criteria, retro of the results and acceptance and adoption of the steps. So you break this initiative down into changes, and you break the changes down into moves. Data-driven transformation is the second part. So the first part was organizational architecture. The second is data-driven transformation. Within data-driven transformation, we have three topics. It's subjective data, flow data, and objective data. We know that there is a certain capacity for change. We know that from a lot of psychological studies. People just have a certain capacity for change. And this is not the same that as the velocity of a Scrum team, for instance. It's really different for every person involved. And it's something that a team has also. Like, if you want to introduce new requirement engineering techniques, and maybe there are people who are really out for that in the team, and they really want to have new requirement engineering techniques, so their capacity for that kind of change would be much higher than someone who is not interested at all in requirements engineering, he just wants to code or test. So you have a certain capacity for certain classes of changes, so to speak. And it's not that hard to measure that, actually. You can just play like planning poker. You can just say, okay, how much capacity do you think as a team would eat that up from your cake of capacity? So how much capacity is needed for a certain change? And with that, you can just try to steer the changes within the teams or within the organization, so that you see what feedback you have, how much capacity is eaten up by a certain change. If you don't do things like that, what usually happens is that you don't have any clue of what the change capacity within the organization, within a single team is, and then you overload the teams with changes, which results in quality, in a bad quality, because people are not interested in following the change. So they do it, but they just do it because they have to do it. Maybe you have a long lead time for this kind of changes. So maybe it takes a long time until new habit forms. So all kinds of things happen if you don't think about what the capacity is, and if you don't actually measure that. So variability is the travel companion of innovation. That means we are not like in a manufacturing environment where we can, with all the lean things, where we can structure our everyday work, but we are usually in a knowledge workers environment where there's a lot of variability, and we want that variability because we want that innovation, and this we also have to take into consideration. So flow data means this is all the data that we are getting out of a Kanban board or that we are getting out of automated systems. So flow data are there for modeling the game philosophy. So they should be like that the game philosophy is actually on the way. As I said, automated evaluation systems, change capacity are must-haves for flow data. The next thing is if you have flow data, then you model your overall systems in accordance to the flow data, or what you get back from the flow data then gives you insight in the overall systems that you have. Then you have a certain hypothesis of how to change the system. You're validating this hypothesis and get another kind of flow data, and then you are modeling your system all over again. So this is a continuous cycle that is just ongoing all the time because you want to usually react to changes all the time in some way. Every part of the game philosophy needs a maturity model because it is so. This is really an important part. So whatever you want to change, there should be a maturity model attached to it. So on the one hand, a maturity model gives an alignment. A maturity model means if you do something, you can do it with better quality or with less quality. That means if you have like a maturity model of 1 to 10 and you say, okay, a 1 for like doing unit tests means a certain thing, a 10 doing unit tests means another thing, and we have all the steps in between, and so we have to see where we are and where we want to go. So a maturity model gives the whole organization the ability to look into where we are heading towards. So maybe we are on step 3 and want to get to step 4. So what exactly do we have to do to get to step 4? And what is beyond step 4? What is step 5, step 6 that we may want to do in the future? We don't know. Maybe we don't have to do it, but at least we have an alignment of what the majority is for a certain topic. So whatever you change, make a maturity model beforehand. Objective data is just usually the data that you get with a lower sampling rate than the flow data. You get objective data only in conjunction with a maturity model, and you have additional perspectives in addition to the flow data to validate the overall system. So subjective data, on the other hand, gives you like emotional transparency. It's like, okay, what do you think of the management? What do you think of the work of the product management, of the product owner, of the scrum master? How well do you feel with your requirement engineering? How well do you feel with your coding standards? How well do you feel with the deployment whatsoever? So emotional transparency should have the same, or subjective data should have the same importance as objective data. And of course, a subjective data is also a great deal of change capacity. So if you have low marks on subjective data, the change capacity will be much lower than if everyone feels well within the organization. So if you want to have a high change capacity, you should have a high rate, high marks in the subjective data for certain areas. So if you have like just low scores in certain areas, most probably the change capacity in that area will also be lower. The third thing is individual development. Usually in the past we had individual development like a little bit of mentoring maybe in the companies, or we had like trainings. Maybe you had 5-6 trainings a year where I could go to. But this is not the kind of individual development we are speaking about. So the third part of this operating systems for organizations has the 3 topics: training enablement, Agile HR, and career model. So what does that actually mean? First of all, you have to have some kind of emotional stability. So emotional stability is the most important factor in the organizational change from my experience and from my point of view. If there is no emotional stability within the system, probably the organizational development will not go that well in terms of speed and quality. Um, so if you care for that, you have to have someone who cares for that. And so we should have something like agile human resource or agile people operations, which is not the same as the human resource department we had in the past. So what we have to have is some kind of career model that is not just based on um, what what someone did in the past, um, uh, in terms of whether he had a certain career within the company and then he's moved to an agile way of working, and in this agile way of working he gets a similar position within the organization, whatever a similar position means, but that you have a hierarchy also based on what the education of people usually is. So if you want to have a new developer and you want to hire a new developer within the team, what you usually do is you get the CV and you look at the CV and say, okay, what did this person study, or what did this person do in the past? So, and judging from that, you either employ this person or not. So um, the same that you are doing to people you are trying to get into the company from the outside world should also be done for people who are working within the company, going to new places within the organization. Like if you have a release train engineer in SAFe, or chief scrum master, or product manager, or what in the agile environment. So this person has to have a certain kind of knowledge, a certain kind of education, a certain kind of experience. And if they don't have that, there's actually no use in introducing agility at all, because then you have people leading agile endeavors that are not used to working with this kind of tools, with this kind of methods, with this kind of mindset. So then your agile transformation will most probably lack a lot of what it could be if you have people on top who know what they are doing. So agile people operations or agile human resource should have like a career plan based on what you really know about the position that you are trying to grow into, or that you have certain kind of boot camps with also with like experience reports that you have to do, that you can just grow into this kind of into this kind of new way of thinking. So you have um, this career model. You have training and enablement, which means that you are not just leaving people alone after they had a certain training, but that you try to form habits, and that trainings are paying towards forming habits. So there has to be a certain acceptance criteria, like when do you think a habit has formed? And if the training helps you in forming a habit, then it's a good training. If the training doesn't help you, if it's just knowledge transfer, then maybe this is not the way that you get the most out of your agile transformation. So career model and training enablement means you have to model the game philosophy somehow. If there is a game philosophy, you have to come up with a career model that matches the game philosophy. And also you have to come up with a training enablement plan which matches the game philosophy. You have to have variation and selection. You cannot just give everything top down, but you have to leave room for variations in different teams and different release trains or whatsoever. You have to be transparent in the adjustment process of the training enablement and the career model. So you have to change that also. And you have to look at the motivation. So you have to bring something in that the people are really motivated to deal with. Okay, so now, as I promised to Janet, now we have 2:45, and this is it for the presentation part. And now we have 15 minutes for the question and answer part.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, I know that we have one question at least in the question manager from Alex Bruckner, and he's asking, how would you recommend to measure the capacity for change? Is there any further reading for this topic?
Actually, this is something that we are lacking right now in the HR world. So how we are doing that in the HR world, and I haven't had the time to publish anything on that up to now. So, but I can tell you what I'm doing. So, when I introduce this idea of change capacity, and as the teams that I work with usually play planning poker or scrum poker, um, anyway, so within the planning the planning session at the start of the sprint, if I introduce like changes or moves into their sprint backlog, then I let them just estimate that with planning poker the same way as they estimate their product features. So that means they are estimating on the one hand how much of their capacity is eaten up by of their team capacity is eaten up by a certain change, and on the other hand I try to let them estimate what do they think what the benefit is if they form something as a habit. So then you have these two numbers that you can just divide the one by the other, and then you have a number that you can prioritize your changes with. As the teams I'm working with usually have a good understanding of Scrum Poker, it's usually easily introduced. But if you start making this transparent, that you say, okay, you have one backlog for everything, for product technical development and also organizational development. And if you start to prioritize that with, on the one hand, what do you think you will get out of that if this would be a habit in your team or in your train? And on the other side, what do you think, how much capacity will be eaten up by a certain story or by a certain move or by a certain change? Then you at least grow into something that is a prioritization for the one backlog to have. So that you start prioritizing uh, within the same backlog as well development, organizational development stories, as well as product development stories. Did that help a little bit?
No response from Alex. Let's go ahead and open the floor here, everyone. If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, unmute your line, and ask it out loud. You're also welcome to click on the, so I see Peter would like the floor. You're also welcome to type your question into the question manager, and I'll read it out loud. Okay, Peter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so Wolfgang, I know there is also an ebook around. Is this accessible for the audience to get more details about what you have presented today, or is this not yet ready for sharing?
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes. So here you have this link. I'm posting that into the chat. This link to the web page where you can download the ebook on that. So I wrote that ebook in German. So I'm sorry, it's not translated yet into English, but every one of you who is able to understand German can download that ebook in PDF version from that web page. It's just for free.
Thank you, Wolfgang.
Thank you.
All right, Thomas, go ahead. All right, I see we have a question here from Michael. What is your perspective? Let me scroll a little bit so I can see there's your perspective and scope of organization to be included in this. R&D, product management, what else?
So, what I'm usually doing when I start something like that is that I try to do a value stream workshop, which is also something that is highly recommended by the Scale Agile framework, for instance, or by lean management. So that you map your end-to-end value stream, and that you get a good understanding as well in the top management as also in the other parts of the hierarchy of what actually is the value that we are creating and how we are creating that. And from there on, maybe if you're doing safe, then you're cutting the whole thing into HR release trains, or maybe you are doing Kanban and then you're cutting that into services and things like that. And from there on, you have to see what's possible to do in the first step. But usually what I'm trying to do is to get the whole end-to-end flow into the change. Because if you are leaving out certain things of the end-to-end value flow, that also means that you're restricted to your horizontal integration. So what you want to do is you want to integrate the whole value stream horizontally so that you get a better lead time, get better quality and things like that. And every part you leave out of the end-to-end value stream restricts you in your ability to integrate that value stream horizontally. So, of course, I know it's not possible all the time. You have to work towards that goal to really match the end-to-end value stream, and maybe that takes a long time, maybe months or years. But at least you should have a good understanding of what you are working towards, so what the actual value stream is in the end that you want to deal with. And when you have cut that down into HR release trains and things like that, what usually is a good thing to start is one HR release train in first hand, so that you say, okay, maybe I have 100 people on an HR release train, and I start working with them and trying to introduce this kind in this HR release train, into this whole HR release train with 100 people, and then I get experience from there, and then I can grow. But from my point of view, there's actually no use in doing that if you don't have a clear understanding of what the actual end-to-end value stream is all about. Did that answer the question?
I don't think we've got Michael live, but that's all right. Okay, everybody, just another minute here. Any further questions for Dr. Bronshuber? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and close then. I want to say thank you very much, Doctor, for taking time to share your expertise with us. Everyone, I hope that you found the information interesting and valuable.